Dad, you shouldn't be here right now, my daughter Jessica said, blocking the door to my own home with her body, her eyes wide with barely concealed panic. Behind her, I could hear laughter, music, and the unmistakable noise of a party in full swing. A party that was clearly taking place in my living room, with my furniture, using my kitchen. It was my 70th birthday. Jessica, this is my house, I replied calmly, holding the shopping bags I had brought home from the market. Why shouldn't I be here? She exchanged a desperate glance with her husband Brad, who appeared beside her in the doorway. He had that forced smile he always wore when he saw me, as if my presence was a necessary inconvenience. It's just that, she stammered, we were organizing a surprise for you, you know? For later. You're too early. But I could see past them. I could see my neighbors, former coworkers, and even some distant relatives scattered around the house. All dressed up for a party. All clearly comfortable and already there for some time. My name is Tom Richardson. I'm 70 years old, widowed for 8 years, and until this moment, I thought I still had a place in my only daughter's life. My wife Margaret always said Jessica had a selfish streak, but I defended our girl. Even when she started visiting less after the funeral. Even when the phone calls grew fewer. Even when I stopped getting invited to my own grandchildren's birthdays. A surprise, I repeated, watching Brad put his protective arm around Jessica's shoulder. And when exactly were you planning to surprise me? Well, Jessica looked at the floor, we were going to call you in a little while and ask you to come over. Then the truth hit me like a punch in the stomach. They weren't throwing a party for me. They were throwing a party about me. A party I wasn't part of, using my own house as a backdrop, probably telling stories about old Tom, while drinking my beer and eating cake. I see, I muttered, taking a step back. Over their shoulders, I saw my sister Helen raising a glass for a toast. She didn't even notice I was standing there, in the doorway of my own house, being prevented from entering. Dad, please don't be like this, Jessica whispered, finally realizing that I had discovered the truth. You can come in, of course. It's just that. It's just that you didn't want me here in the first place, I finished for her. Brad cleared his throat. Tom, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Misunderstanding. As if I were some confused old man who couldn't interpret the situation correctly. As they continued their awkward explanations, a strange calm came over me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something different. It was clarity. Because they didn't know about the last 3 years of my life. They didn't know about the late nights I spent learning digital marketing. They didn't know about the silent empire I built from my little basement office. And they definitely didn't know that, at that very moment, my bank account had more money than Brad had earned in 5 years. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this story is just getting started. It's okay, I finally said, turning my back on them. Enjoy the party. As I walked back to the car, I heard Jessica whisper something to Brad about him being dramatic again. They had no idea how dramatic I could really be. I drove to the supermarket parking lot and sat there for 20 minutes, watching people come and go with their bags, their normal lives, their families who probably loved them enough to invite them to their own birthday parties. Jessica had always been like that. Even as a child, she had an impressive ability to rewrite reality to suit her interests. When she was 16 and broke Margaret's favorite vase, she spent an entire week convincing her mother that the cat had done it. Margaret knew it was a lie. The cat had arthritis and could barely climb onto the couch, but Jessica had a way of talking that made you question your own memory. Maybe you didn't see right, Mom, she would say with those big, innocent eyes. You know how bad your eyesight is. Margaret never had any problems with her eyesight. But the real problem started after the funeral. In the first few weeks, Jessica still came by often. She brought casseroles she bought at the supermarket and reheated, as if she had cooked them herself. She sat with me in the living room, fiddling with her cell phone and making comments about how I needed to get out more and make new friends. Dad, you can't stay here alone forever, she would say, without taking her eyes off the screen. It's not healthy. But I noticed how she looked around the house during these visits. Her eyes lingered on the big screen TV Margaret and I had bought last Christmas together. On her antique collection. On the piano that no one played anymore. And especially on the basement office, where I had started spending more and more time. What do you do down there so much? She asked once, coming down the stairs uninvited. Nothing much, I replied, quickly closing my laptop. Just some projects. She frowned, looking at the stacks of books on digital marketing, the notebooks full of notes, the post-its stuck to the wall with ideas and reminders. Projects? What kind of projects does a retiree need to do? The way she said retiree, as if it were synonymous with useless, stuck in my mind for weeks. It was around this time that Brad started coming up more often in conversation. Jessica had met him at a networking event for the company where she worked as a sales manager. He was a financial advisor, she explained, and was helping important people optimize their investments. Brad had the kind of confidence that comes from growing up rich and never questioning whether you really deserve the things you have. Firm handshakes, smiles that lasted just long enough to seem sincere, and a way of talking about money that made any conversation sound like a business opportunity. "Tom," he said when I first met him, "Jessica told me about your situation. It must be hard living on a fixed income after so many years of working." My situation. As if it were a medical condition. "Actually, I'm doing fine," I replied. Sure, he nodded, the way people do when they don't believe you but don't want to argue. "But you know, there are always ways to maximize what you have. Smart investments, tax planning. I can take a look at your finances, if you'd like. As a favor." Margaret always said to be wary of any favor someone offers without being asked. Jessica's visits became less frequent after she and Brad got married. Once a month, then once every 2 months. Always in a hurry, always with some important appointment right after. "We'd really like to stay longer, Dad," she would say, already grabbing her purse while I was still pouring coffee. "But Brad has a meeting with some very important clients." The dinner invitations stopped completely after the twins were born. Lucas and Emma, now 12, whom I saw mostly in Facebook photos. "They're going through a difficult phase," Jessica would explain whenever I suggested a visit. "You know how preteens can be. Very busy with school and activities. Too busy to meet their grandfather. And today, on my 70th birthday, they were too busy to include me in my own party." I grabbed my phone and opened my banking app, just to make sure the numbers I saw every morning were still there. Checking account balance, $72,415. Savings account balance, $1,283,902. Last month's income from my 3 online sources, $121,670. They had no idea. While Jessica posted photos of expensive brunches on Instagram and Brad sold life insurance to desperate retirees, I had built a silent empire from my basement. 3 years of late nights studying YouTube algorithms, digital marketing strategies, copywriting techniques. 3 years pretending to watch television while actually developing online courses that taught people my age how to start over after 60. The irony was that it all started because I wanted to impress Jessica. I wanted to have something interesting to tell her when she asked how I was spending my time. But she stopped asking before I had an answer. Now, as I sat in that parking lot, watching my own house through the side window of the car, where a party was happening without me, I made a decision. They wanted to treat me like I was invisible? Perfect. Because invisible people can do things that no one sees coming. I returned home 2 hours later, pretending I had gone to the movies. The party was still going on. I parked across the street and watched through the living room window. Jessica was in the center of a circle of people, gesturing animatedly as she told a story. Probably about how hard it was to take care of a stubborn widower for a father. Brad was serving drinks in my kitchen, using my 15-year-old whiskey that I saved for special occasions. He was laughing too loud, as he always did when he drank, and I could tell he had already opened the whole bottle. But what really hurt me was seeing my grandchildren, Lucas and Emma, playing in the backyard with children I didn't recognize. They looked happy, relaxed. Happier than I had seen them in years. When was the last time they laughed like that in my presence? I waited until everyone had left, until Jessica and Brad had finished cleaning up the mess with the haste of people trying to erase evidence. At 10:30 p.m., they finally left, taking the half-asleep twins with them in the back seat of the SUV. I entered through the back door, using my own key, as if I were an intruder in my own home. The living room still smelled of expensive perfume and red wine. There were crumbs on the rug Margaret had chosen 20 years ago, and a stain on the sofa cushion that would probably never come out. In the kitchen trash, I found the remains of my birthday cake. A cake I never got to taste, With candles I never got to blow out. The chocolate frosting still stuck to the sides of the trash can. 70 candles. Someone had taken the trouble to count them. I grabbed my cell phone and saw 17 missed messages. All from Jessica. Dad, where are you? Please call me when you get this. I'm worried. You left without saying anything. Brad said you might be upset, but it was all a misunderstanding. Can you call me? I just want to make sure you're okay. The last message had come in 20 minutes ago. Dad, I love you. We can talk tomorrow and clear everything up. I love you. When was the last time she had said that? When was the last time any of them had said that? Margaret always warned me about Jessica. She only shows affection when she wants something, Tom, my wife would say. Pay attention to the timing. At the time, I thought Margaret was being too hard on our daughter. Now, rereading those desperate messages, I realized Margaret was right, as always. Jessica wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the consequences. The next morning, she showed up at my door with a bouquet of flowers and that look of remorse she had perfected over the years. Dad, she said, hugging me a little too tightly, I'm sorry about yesterday. It was really a misunderstanding. I let her in and offered her coffee. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Margaret and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 41 years. The truth is, Jessica continued, stirring the sugar in her coffee more vigorously than necessary, we wanted to do something special for you. A real surprise party. But you showed up in the middle of the preparations. Preparations that lasted 4 hours? I asked calmly. She stopped stirring her coffee. What do you mean? I saw you through the window when I got home this morning. The party was already in full swing. Her face turned slightly red. Well, we got here early to get everything ready. Jessica, I said gently, I saw you serving cake. I saw the kids playing in the yard. Those weren't preparations. It was a party I was excluded from. She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand. And it's okay, I continued. Really. I'm not angry. Her expression changed from defensive to confused. You're not. No. Actually, I was impressed by how organized you were. You got so many people together, made all that food, decorated the house. It must have cost a fortune. She blinked. Well, it wasn't cheap. Did Brad pay for everything? Actually, she hesitated, we were hoping, maybe you could help with the costs. After all, technically it was your party. There it was. The real reason for the visit. Sure, I said. How much did you spend? About $800, she said quickly. But you don't have to pay all of it. Maybe just half. $800 for a party I'd been excluded from. A party in my own house, using my own food and drink, and now they wanted me to pay for it. No problem, I said, getting up to get my checkbook. Jessica smiled, clearly relieved. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. I filled out the check carefully. $800, exactly. I signed it with the same pen I used to sign six-figure contracts for my online courses. She folded the check and put it in her purse without even looking at it. Brad will be so relieved. He was worried you'd be upset. Tell Brad he doesn't need to worry, I replied. I'm not upset. I'm polite. Polite. You taught me a very valuable lesson yesterday, Jessica. About expectations. About family. About my place in your lives. She frowned. Dad, you're talking weird. I'm speaking clearly. For the first time in years. I walked to the door and opened it for her. Thanks for coming. And for the party. It was very enlightening. Jessica hesitated in the doorway, as if she wanted to say something else, but she just mumbled, I love you, Dad, and left. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. They had no idea what they had just done. They had no idea that by excluding me from my own birthday party, they had given me the most valuable gift possible, absolute clarity about who they really were. And now that I knew exactly who they were, I could decide exactly who I would be in response. I went down to the basement and turned on my laptop. I opened the file I had started 3 months ago, when I first noticed that something was changing in their behavior. The file was called Project Awakening. It was time to put it all into action. If you've ever paid for a party you were excluded from, subscribe to the channel because this story is far from over. While Jessica drove home, telling Brad how she had gotten the $800 from the silly old man, I was typing the first email in a sequence that would change everything. The subject line read, "Investment Proposal, Unique Opportunity for the Richardson Family." They didn't know it yet, but they had just signed up for the most expensive lesson of their lives. 3 weeks had passed since the birthday party. Jessica called me twice to see how I was doing, both conversations lasting less than 5 minutes before she had to take an important work call. Brad didn't contact me once. But I wasn't worried about them. I was busy. The Awakening Project had begun 3 years earlier, when Margaret died, and I realized I had 2 choices: waste away in loneliness or completely reinvent who I was. I chose reinvention. I started watching YouTube videos about how people my age were building online businesses. Old people teaching other old people about investing, retirement, how to deal with loneliness. Most were amateurish, poorly filmed, with no real strategy. I saw an opportunity. I created my first course called Restarting at 60, How to Build Passive Income in Your Golden Years. It wasn't revolutionary, just everything I had learned about investing condensed into 12 practical modules. I sold 16 copies in the first month. But what really changed everything was when I discovered the power of personal stories. I started by sharing my own journey, a lost widower who became a digital entrepreneur. Vulnerability connected with people in a way that financial data never could. In 6 months, I was making $5,000 a month. In a year, $15,000. Now, 3 years later, my operation included 4 different courses, 2 weekly podcasts, a YouTube channel with 86,000 subscribers, and a one-on-one consulting service that charged $500 an hour. The irony was that Jessica and Brad, with all their important contacts and constant networking, had never managed to build anything close to what I had. But they didn't know that. To them, I was still just old Tom, sitting alone at home watching reruns on television. The Awakening Project was my plan to change that perception in a dramatic way. Phase 1 had been silent observation. For the past 6 months, I had documented every interaction with Jessica and Brad. Every condescending conversation, every excuse for not visiting me, every time they treated me like a burden. Especially her attitudes toward money. Jessica always hinted that I should be more careful with my spending. Brad loved to make comments about people on fixed incomes and how they needed to plan better. They saw my retirement as a limitation, not a freedom. Phase 2 was financial preparation. Over the past few months, I had transferred most of my earnings into separate accounts, strategic investments, and even a few acquisitions they would never guess about. Like the beach house in Myrtle Beach I bought in December. Cash. Or the shares in the company where Brad worked. I found out that Tech Solutions Incorporated was in financial trouble and planned to lay off 40% of its consulting staff in the coming months. Brad didn't know. But I did, because I was now a minority shareholder in the company. Phase 3 would be the controlled revelation. I opened my laptop and reviewed the schedule I had created. In 2 weeks, Jessica would turn 42. As usual, she would throw a small party, just close family. As usual, I would be invited out of obligation. And as usual, they would expect me to show up with a modest gift and sit quietly in the corner. This time would be different. I grabbed my cell phone and called Marcus Wright, my personal accountant. Yes, I had a personal accountant now. And a lawyer. And an investment advisor. Marcus, it's Tom. I need you to prepare a complete financial report of my activities over the last 3 years. Presentation format, something that lay people can easily understand. Sure, Tom. For what occasion? Let's just say it's time my family found out who I've really become. Marcus laughed. He had become more than my accountant over the past few years. He was one of the few people who knew the whole story. Are you finally going to reveal your little empire? Little. I paused for effect. Marcus, last quarter I made more than some CEOs of medium-sized companies. You're right. Considerable empire. After hanging up, I opened the document I had started the week before, Richardson Family Investment Proposal. It was a legitimate business plan offering Jessica and Brad the opportunity to become partners in one of my companies. Naturally, they would assume it was some naive scheme by a retiree trying to feel important. They wouldn't read the fine print. They never did. They wouldn't see that the conditions included a full audit of their personal finances. They wouldn't notice the clause giving me full access to their credit reports and tax returns. And they definitely wouldn't realize that by signing, they would be agreeing to a formal presentation where I would reveal exactly how I had built my little business. If you've ever been underestimated by people who should have supported you, subscribe to the channel because Tom's revenge is just getting started. The next morning, I printed the proposal on Richardson Enterprises LLC letterhead. Yes, I had letterhead now, and placed it in a leather executive folder. Jessica would be intrigued. Brad would see dollars. Neither would ask the right questions. As I closed the folder, I smiled at the thought of how Margaret would react if she could see me now. Tom Richardson, I could hear her saying, you were always smarter than you let on. It was true. And in 2 weeks, at Jessica's birthday party, everyone would find out just how smart I had become. Best of all, they would give me the perfect opportunity for my big reveal. Because greedy people always bite shiny bait. And my bait was about to become irresistible. Jessica's birthday party went exactly as I had planned. The house was spotless, the decorations were expensive, and the guests were chosen to impress. I arrived promptly at 7, wearing my best suit and carrying 2 gifts, a beautiful jewelry box for Jessica and my leather briefcase. Daddy. Jessica hugged me, but her eyes were already scanning the other guests. I'm so glad you came. Brad's in the kitchen making drinks. The room was full of young couples, her co-workers, a few prosperous neighbors. They all looked like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. I stood out as the only man over 60. Tom. Brad appeared with 2 glasses of wine, smiling too broadly. You look good. Enjoying retirement. More than I imagined, I replied, accepting the wine. During dinner, I stayed quiet in my corner, observing. Jessica and Brad took turns telling stories about expensive trips, exclusive restaurants, smart investments. His friends laughed at the right moments, asked admiring questions, and created that atmosphere of young dynamic success. I was just the retired father, present out of family obligation. Perfect. After the cake, when Jessica was opening her gifts, I stood up quietly. Jessica, before you open my present, I said, picking up the leather briefcase, I'd like to share something with all of you. The conversation died down. Brad raised an eyebrow. Actually, I continued, opening the briefcase, I have a business proposal for Jessica and Brad. I thought it would be appropriate to present it here, with witnesses. Jessica laughed nervously. Dad, how about we leave this for later? No, Brad interrupted, approaching with sudden interest. I'm curious. What kind of proposal? I distributed copies of the proposal to a few close guests. The document looked impressive, 20 pages, colorful graphics, detailed financial projections. Well, I began, my voice carrying the authority I had developed in hundreds of online presentations. Over the past 3 years, I've built a digital education company. It started small, but it's grown beyond my expectations. Brad flipped through the pages, his interest clearly piqued by the numbers he saw. Dad, Jessica whispered, you never mentioned. Richardson Enterprises, I continued, currently has 3 main product lines. Online courses for people over 60, retirement and investment consulting, and a one-on-one mentoring program. The room was completely silent now. Last quarter, I turned to the page with the charts. Our net revenue was $364,000. Brad nearly spilled his wine. 300 and, did you say thousand? Yes. And we're projecting 40% growth for the next quarter. Jessica looked at me as if I had spoken in an alien language. Dad, is this real? I took out my phone and opened the banking app. I turned the screen toward her, showing the business account balance, $1,422,815. Very real. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the distant sound of cars passing on the street. The proposal, I continued calmly, is to offer you a 20% stake in the company in exchange for a $50,000 initial investment and full-time dedication. Brad was doing the math in his head. 20% of a company that was making over $1 million a year. Obviously, I added, you would need to leave your current jobs to devote yourselves completely to the growth of Richardson Enterprises. Dad, Jessica finally managed to say, why didn't you ever tell us about this? You never asked me about my life, I replied simply. When you did ask, it was always about my health, my bills, whether I was getting by. Never about my plans or dreams. Brad was furiously rereading the pages. Tom, this shows you own property in 3 states. 4, actually. I bought a beach house in Oregon last week. Jessica sat down heavily on the sofa. You're a millionaire? Technically, yes. But I prefer the term late-stage entrepreneur. That's when I decided to drop the final bombshell. By the way, Brad, I said casually, I see you work at Tech Solutions Incorporated. Interesting company. Especially considering that I've been a minority shareholder for the past 6 months. His face paled. And I have bad news. The company is announcing 40% cuts in the consulting division next Monday. Your name is on the list. Brad dropped the proposal. How could you know that? Because I was at the board meeting last Thursday. Via video conference, of course. Jessica looked between us, trying to process everything. Are you firing Brad? I'm not firing anyone. The company is restructuring due to poor financial performance. Brad's just one of the victims of corporate decisions. The room exploded in whispers. The guests exchanged shocked glances, some already reaching for their cell phones. So, I said, closing my briefcase, the offer still stands. You have a week to decide if you want to be part of my success, or continue pretending that I'm just a harmless old man you can ignore. As I walked toward the door, I heard Jessica calling after me, her voice broken and desperate. Dad, wait. We can talk about this. I turned one last time. The woman who had thrown a party at my house without inviting me, who had charged me $800 for my own humiliation, was now begging for my attention. You sure can, I replied calmly. My office opens at 9 in the morning. Schedule a meeting with my secretary. The door closed behind me, leaving behind a room full of people recalculating everything they thought they knew about Tom Richardson. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, subscribe to the channel because Tom's story is about to get the ending he deserves. As I drove home, my phone rang 17 times. I didn't answer a single call. They finally wanted to talk. But now it would be on my terms. The following Monday, Jessica and Brad showed up at my office at 9 o'clock sharp. Not at my house, where they used to visit me when they needed something. At my professional office, on the 12th floor of a commercial building in the city center. My secretary, Linda, an efficient 55-year-old woman I had hired 6 months earlier, greeted them with a cold courtesy reserved for unscheduled clients. Mr. Richardson will see you in a few minutes, she said, offering them water as they waited in the reception area decorated with award certificates and photos of me with other business leaders. When I finally called them in, Jessica could barely hide her shock. My office was bigger than her living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. 2 bookshelves filled with business books, 3 monitors on my executive desk, and walls decorated with Richardson Enterprises growth charts. Dad, Jessica whispered, I didn't know you had a place like this. There's a lot you don't know about me, I replied, gesturing for them to sit in the leather chairs across from my desk. But I imagine you're here to change that. Brad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. His usual confidence had completely evaporated since he found out about his impending unemployment. Tom, about the proposal you made at the party. Call me Mr. Richardson here, please. We're in a professional setting. Jessica blinked, surprised by the formality. Dad. Mr. Richardson, we'd like to hear more about the partnership opportunity. I picked up a folder prepared specifically for this meeting and opened it with deliberate calm. Inside were partnership agreements, confidentiality agreements, and a complete financial audit I had commissioned on their situation. Before we discuss any partnership, I began, removing the reading glasses I had started wearing only for important meetings. I need to understand your current financial situation. Brad shifted in his chair. Our situation is stable. Really? I flipped through a few pages. Because according to my research, you have $47,000 in credit card debt, 3 late car payments, and your mortgage is 2 months behind. The silence in the room was absolute. In addition, I continued calmly, Brad, your position at Tech Solutions will be eliminated on Thursday of this week. The severance package offers 6 months' salary, but considering your current monthly expenses, that will only get you through March. Jessica looked at Brad, who was pale. You didn't tell me things were that bad. I was dealing with it, he muttered. Dealing with it? I turned another page. You've applied for 17 positions in the last 2 months. No positive responses. The market for consultants of your age and experience is saturated. Brad hung his head. On the other hand, I continued, my voice taking on a more businesslike tone, my partnership offer still stands. 20% of Richardson Enterprises in exchange for a $50,000 initial investment and full-time dedication. Jessica leaned forward, hopeful. And you said the company's revenue is? Last quarter was $364,000 net. Projected for next year is $1.5 million. Her eyes lit up with the mathematical possibilities. But, I added, closing the folder, there is one condition I didn't mention at the party. Brad raised his head. What condition? You would have to work directly for me. As employees. Brad would be a digital marketing assistant. Jessica, customer service coordinator. Starting salary of $40,000 a year each, with the possibility of growth based on performance. Jessica frowned. But you said partnership. Partnership comes after you prove your worth. After you demonstrate that you can commit to something bigger than your own immediate interests. The room was silent for several minutes. I could see Jessica calculating in her head. $80,000 a year combined was less than they were making before, but it was guaranteed stability in a time of total crisis. What if we say no? Brad finally asked. Then I wish you luck in your job search, I replied simply. The market is competitive, but I'm sure you'll find something eventually. Jessica looked out the window, watching the city below where she would have to start her professional life over at 42. Dad, she said softly, why are you doing this? Because, I replied, taking off my glasses and cleaning them slowly, you taught me that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect and consistent presence. You excluded me when you thought I had no value. Now I'm offering inclusion, but with clear terms. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. When Margaret died, I didn't know how to move forward. You could have been my support, my new redefined family. Instead, you chose to see me as a burden, as an inconvenient responsibility. Jessica wiped her eyes, clearly moved. So I learned to be my own family, to build my own purpose. And I found that I'm much better at it than I ever imagined. I stood up and walked over to the window, watching the city bustle below. The party at my house without me was the moment of clarity I needed. You gave me an invaluable gift that day, the truth about who you really are when you think I can be used without consequences. I turned back to them. But I also discovered who I really am when I'm not waiting for validation from people who have already decided they don't value me. Brad finally spoke. We messed up, Tom. Mr. Richardson. We messed up big time. Yes, you did. But mistakes can be corrected with time, consistent effort, and genuine change in behavior. Jessica stood up. If we agree to work for you, would it really be a chance to rebuild our relationship? It would be a chance to build a real relationship for the first time, I corrected. Based on mutual respect rather than family obligation or convenience. They exchanged glances. The decision wasn't just about a job or money. It was about completely recalibrating the family dynamic they had established. We need time to think, Jessica said. Of course. You have until Friday to decide. After that, the offer expires and I'll look for other candidates. Linda walked them to the elevator while I stood at the window, watching their figures shrink on the sidewalk below. On Thursday, Brad was officially fired. On Friday, they accepted my offer. 6 months later, Jessica had become one of the best customer service coordinators I've ever had. She discovered a natural talent for solving complex problems and calming frustrated customers. Brad, surprisingly, proved to be creative with digital marketing campaigns after he overcame his initial resistance to learning new technologies. More importantly, they started visiting me on Sundays. Not out of obligation or financial interest, but because they genuinely wanted to be there. Lucas and Emma, my grandchildren, finally got to know their real grandfather, not just the distant figure who sent Christmas presents. At the company's one-year meeting, I announced that Jessica and Brad had earned their 20% shares. They cried when they signed the actual partnership documents. "Dad," Jessica said that night after all the other employees had left, "why did you give us a second chance?" "Because," I replied, organizing the papers on my desk, "true revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's giving them the opportunity to become better people than they were when they hurt you." Brad, who had remained quiet during the celebration, finally spoke up. "We didn't deserve that generosity." "No," I agreed. "But deserving isn't the point. Growth is." Today, 3 years after the birthday party that changed everything, Richardson Enterprises has 22 employees and offices in 4 states. Jessica runs the customer service division with a team of 8. Brad leads our digital marketing team and has discovered he has a real talent for storytelling in campaigns. Lucas wants to study business when he goes to college. Emma spends her summers working as an intern at the company, learning about the business her grandfather built. And me? Well, I've discovered that the best revenge isn't proving you're better than those who hurt you. It's proving to yourself that you can turn pain into purpose, rejection into renewal, exclusion into expansion. Margaret always said that the best lessons come from the worst moments. She was right, as always. If you've ever been excluded by your own family, if you've ever felt invisible to those who should love you unconditionally, subscribe to this channel. Because Tom Richardson's story proves that it's never too late to rebuild your life on your own terms. And if you've made it to the end of this journey with us, leave a comment telling us, what was the moment that changed everything in your life? The last time I threw a party at my house, Jessica and Brad arrived 2 hours early to help with the preparations. This time, when the cake came out, I was there to blow out the candles. And this time, when I made my birthday wish, it wasn't for recognition or revenge. It was out of gratitude. Because sometimes, being excluded from the table is exactly the push you need to build your own table. A bigger, stronger table, where there is room for everyone who chooses to sit with respect and purpose. The original Richardson family had 3 members. The Richardson family I've built has 22 employees, 4 adopted grandchildren of employees who call me Grandpa Tom, and a network of customers who have become true friends. They tried to make me feel small. Instead, they taught me exactly how big I could become.